Chapter 1. The Vanishing at the Desert Gala. The desert wind carried a scent of sand and spice as the sun bled into the horizon beyond the ochre cliffs. Somewhere beyond those dunes, veiled by shifting heat and distance, the world ended, or so it felt, to those who had come to the exclusive Mirage Caravan Gala, held once a year in the Saharan outskirts of Morocco. Under embroidered tents with silk cushions and brass lanterns glowing, the rich and rarefied had gathered for what was meant to be an unforgettable celebration. It would indeed become unforgettable, but not for the reasons the hosts had intended. The Mirage Caravan was no ordinary event. Sponsored by the opulent Montfleur family, it catered to a secretive circle of aristocrats, collectors, and adventurers who prided themselves on exclusivity. This year's theme was Legacies in Sand, and beneath the largest tent shaped like a desert palace, priceless artifacts lay on velvet-covered tables, Egyptian amulets, Phoenician scrolls, and even a reconstructed Roman sundial. Among the guests were titled Europeans, mysterious Middle Eastern financiers, and a smattering of scholars and performers hired to amuse the elite. At the centre of it all was Madame Célestine Montfleur, tall, silver-haired and draped in deep sapphire robes that shimmered like moonlit water. She held a copper chalice as she greeted her guests one by one, voice honeyed, smile practiced. To her left, her husband Augustin Montfleur stood tall, lean and weathered, with a gaze like cracked marble, piercing but distant. He had once been a diplomat, it was said, though no one quite knew for whom or what country. Whispers also claimed he had been a spy or a smuggler, or both. But the star of this year's gala was neither Augustin nor Célestine. It was their daughter, Yvette Montfleur, a luminous figure in a flowing crimson dress, her laughter a contrast to the desert's silence. Only 23, she was rumoured to be engaged to Lionel Merton, a reserved English archaeologist who rarely smiled but never let Yvette out of his sight. Their engagement had been announced only 2 nights ago, under the glow of firelight and stars, to mixed reactions. Some toasted sincerely, others hesitated. And it was Yvette who would disappear. The music was still playing, an oud reverberating softly against a hypnotic drum, when the first screams echoed from the central tent. Madame Célestine dropped her chalice. Augustin rushed forward. A bronze-framed mirror had been knocked over, shattering across the floor, its ornate stand bent at a strange angle. Yvette's red shawl lay crumpled beneath it. But Yvette herself was gone. Not gone in the way a young woman sneaks off from a party to steal a moment with a lover. Not gone in the way someone slips into the shadows out of boredom. No, her absence was absolute, inexplicable. No one had seen her leave the tent. No one had seen her outside. The guards at the caravan perimeter, armed and experienced, swore she had not passed. And in the 30 seconds between her final laugh and the crashing mirror, she had evaporated from the celebration entirely. Panic did not arrive at once. It came in stages. At first, the guests assumed it was a joke, then a performance. Then concern crept in as Madame Célestine's voice cracked while calling her daughter's name. The musicians fell silent. The firelight seemed to dim. Within the hour, the Moroccan police arrived, led by Inspector Tazi, a man whose uniform was always immaculate, whose moustache was nearly symmetrical, and whose patience was visibly thinning as the hours dragged with no sign of the missing woman. She could not have gone far, he declared with finality, as though the desert answered to logic. "But there are no tracks," said Lionel, his eyes hollow. "People do not vanish," Tazi insisted. "She is hiding or has run away. There is no crime, no blood." "No," Augustine said quietly, turning to the inspector. But there is something worse. A secret. The guests were questioned, tents searched, and the surrounding sands combed by torchlight and drone alike. Nothing. That night, while the stars blinked coldly overhead, Madame Celestine sent a discreet message through one of her European staff. She had heard of a certain detective from Belgium, a man who was said to solve the unsolvable, a man with a name whispered from Cairo to Calais, a man with a moustache finer than even Inspector Tarzy's. By morning, Hercule Poirot would be en route. And so, the desert waited. Chapter 2. Echoes in the Sand. The desert, so vast and quiet in the morning light, gave no hint of the drama that had unfolded beneath its star-drenched canopy. But within the circle of tents, still strung with coloured silks and embroidered veils, unease simmered beneath every breath. Guests whispered over breakfast trays, their gazes darting toward the central pavilion where Yvette had last been seen. The air, scented with cardamom and dust, held an expectant stillness, like the moment before a curtain is drawn. By 10 o'clock, a small caravan of black automobiles shimmered into view from the east. The lead car, a gleaming Citroën, came to a gentle stop in front of the Montfleur tent. From it emerged a man no taller than 5'5", immaculate in cream linen and a Panama hat. His dark, patent leather shoes stepped with elegant precision onto the sand. A slight pause, a sniff, and then the tip of a handkerchief came swiftly to his nose. "Mon Dieu," murmured Hercule Poirot, "even the sand here has a scent." He adjusted his cuffs, straightened his tie, and stepped forward with the deliberate composure of a man who was not simply entering a scene, but taking possession of it. Augustin Montfleur greeted him first, his face a mask of tension barely held in check. "Monsieur Poirot, we are grateful you came so swiftly." "Time," Poirot replied, "is a luxury I do not waste when a life may hang in balance." Poirot's eyes moved swiftly across the space. The large tent, now partially emptied, still bore traces of the previous night, crushed petals on the floor, a faint spatter of spilled wine, and the shattered bronze mirror. His gaze lingered there. "This was not broken by chance," he said quietly. Madame Celestine appeared at the tent's threshold, her posture taut, hands clutching a rosary. "Please," she said in a strained voice, "anything you need?" Poirot inclined his head. "I will require the guest list, a map of the grounds, and the name of every person who had access to this pavilion." "I will provide it," Augustin said. Poirot moved closer to the site of the incident, kneeling beside the fragments of bronze and glass. He examined them carefully, lifting a piece delicately with a gloved hand. He measured the spread of the shards, their angles, then tilted his head slightly. "This mirror, it fell forward, not backward," he murmured. "You think that matters?" asked a voice behind him. Lionel Merton had appeared, his dark suit rumpled, and his face shadowed by exhaustion. "I watched them search for hours. No footprints? No trace? You'll find nothing." Poirot stood slowly. "Ah, but you see, Monsieur Merton, I do not search in sand alone. I search in silence, in behavior, in what people emit." Lionel's eyes flared for a moment. Then he turned away, muttering, "We've all said everything there is to say." Poirot watched him go, then turned to Augustin. "If you please, Monsieur Montfleur, I would like to begin with those present at the moment of disappearance. Were there witnesses who saw Mademoiselle Yvette just before the mirror fell?" "Half the tent," Augustin replied grimly. "She was standing near the centre, beneath the main chandelier, laughing." "Laughing?" Poirot echoed. "Yes, she'd just been handed a letter. We never found it." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "A letter? From whom?" No one knows. She read it, laughed, too loudly, perhaps, and then, he gestured toward the crushed mirror. Gone. Poirot's eyes glinted. Then let us begin there. Within the hour, he had assembled a list of immediate witnesses. They included a retired opera singer from Milan, an Egyptian collector with a deep laugh and deeper pockets, and a French poet who claimed to have seen a flicker, not a disappearance. Each was questioned politely, precisely, and each gave a different recollection. One saw Yvette alone, another said she was speaking to someone in a golden robe, yet no such robe had been found. The poet insisted she had looked surprised or terrified. Poirot took copious notes in a small leather-bound book. But it was not their words he truly studied. It was their eyes, their hesitations, the cracks in composure when he pressed ever so gently on their memories. Finally, he returned to the tent once more. He stood where Yvette had stood, faced the mirror's broken frame. Then he closed his eyes. There is something false here, he whispered to himself. Not in what is said, but in what was not done. He turned to Tazi, who hovered nearby with mild skepticism. Inspector, tell me, in all your search of the grounds, did you look above? Above? Tazi frowned. The canopy, Poirot said, pointing to the intricately patterned cloth high above. Perhaps our answers are not buried beneath the sand, but suspended in air. Poirot's gaze lingered on the fabric, where a subtle bulge near one of the support beams caught his eye. And in that moment, the mirage began to shift. Chapter 3. The Canopy Clue. With quiet precision, Hercule Poirot gestured for a step-ladder to be brought. The Moroccan staff obeyed at once, though they looked at one another uneasily. No one had dared disturb the grand central canopy since the incident. It was considered both decorative and sacred, hand-woven by local artisans and embroidered with family sigils and ancient Berber patterns. But Poirot was not concerned with custom. He climbed slowly, testing each rung with deliberate care, then reached upward with his gloved hand toward the slight bulge in the fabric. A silence fell upon those gathered below, as though the very air dared not move. With a tug, Poirot loosened a small, stitched flap, and something dropped into his hand, a velvet drawstring pouch. Descending with the delicacy of a man holding glass, Poirot opened the pouch as all eyes fixed on him. Inside was a single object, a small brass key. It was ornate, old-fashioned, shaped like a rose stem, with one petal missing from its carved head. He held it up. Curious, he said softly. A key hidden above our heads, a hiding place prepared in advance. Tell me, Inspector Tazi, do the Montfleur possess a chest or safe this might belong to? Tazi looked to Augustin, who was now pale. We have a strong-box, yes. It's built into the base of Celestine's writing desk, but it is opened by a code, not a key. Poirot turned the key in his hand, studying its worn teeth. Then this opens something else, perhaps not in the tent, perhaps not even in the open. At that moment, Madame Celestine entered the tent, followed by Dr. Rahim, an aging curator from the Marrakesh Historical Trust, invited to appraise the displayed artifacts. Poirot stepped aside to greet them. Madame, he said with gentle formality, do you recognize this? She peered at the key but shook her head. Number, it's not from our collection. Dr. Rahim? Poirot offered it next. The old man adjusted his spectacles, examined it, then raised an eyebrow. I believe I've seen such a design before. It resembles a key used for travelling trunks in the 1800s, British make, decorative but functional. Poirot nodded slowly. And do the Montfleur own such a trunk? I do, Lionel Merton's voice broke in from behind. He had re-entered the tent silently. It belonged to my grandfather. I keep it in my tent. All turned toward him. Poirot's gaze lingered. And have you opened it recently, monsieur? No, Lionel said, not in months. Poirot's moustache twitched. Let us change that. They walked across the desert courtyard to Lionel's tent, a modest one by comparison, canvas-coloured and without embellishment. Inside, the air was cooler, the scent of tobacco clinging faintly to the fabric. Against the far wall stood the trunk, iron corners, brass hinges, a rose-stem keyhole. Poirot knelt. He inserted the key. A soft click. The trunk creaked open. Inside, neatly folded clothing and leather-bound journals lined one side, but on the other, resting between two pairs of boots, lay something unexpected. A folded red scarf. Yvette's. Poirot reached for it, held it gently. The silk still held her perfume. Lionel paled. I don't know how it got there. Poirot's voice remained calm. Monsieur, are you in the habit of borrowing your fiancée's clothing? Of course not. And did she ever enter your tent unaccompanied? Not that I'm aware of. Then how? Poirot asked quietly. Does something she was wearing at the moment of her disappearance come to be hidden among your belongings? Lionel's hands trembled slightly. Someone's trying to frame me. Possibly, Poirot said. Or possibly you are trying to distance yourself from something you fear. Before Lionel could respond, Augustine appeared at the tent's entrance. His voice was tense. Poirot, there's something else. One of the guests, Lady Hemsworth, has reported a missing item from her private collection. A necklace, emeralds, vanished sometime last night. Poirot exhaled softly. Another disappearance. How convenient. He turned back to Lionel. You see, monsieur, your problem is not the presence of guilt. It is the absence of logic. If someone meant to incriminate you, they would not use something so easily identifiable, unless they want you to find it and panic. Lionel swallowed hard. Do you think Yvette's still alive? Poirot stared at the scarf in his hands. Alive, perhaps, but frightened, certainly. She left a trail, monsieur, not to be rescued, but to be understood. He folded the scarf carefully and tucked it into an evidence pouch. Let us return to the main tent. There is more here than meets the eye, and someone, somewhere, is counting on the desert to swallow what remains of their sins. Chapter 4. Poirot casts his net back beneath the central canopy. Poirot sat on a low, cushioned divan, fingers steepled, his gaze fixed not on any one person, but on the room itself, as though waiting for the very air to confess. Around him, the guests moved in nervous eddies. Some had begun packing their belongings, others lingered, hovering near the serving tables as though the act of drinking mint tea could ward off suspicion. Madame Celestine, regal even in weariness, returned with a stack of papers in her hand. The guest list, Monsieur Poirot, every person here, staff included. I've also marked their arrival times and tent numbers. Poirot took it with a nod of thanks. Très bien, madame. And your family's itinerary, or movements last evening? Augustine and I were in the south tent with the Egyptian guests during the music performance. Yvette joined us shortly after 9, then left to retrieve something from her suite. 20 minutes later, the announcement came. Poirot hummed thoughtfully. And she returned alone? She said nothing, only smiled and waved a letter in her hand. She seemed exhilarated. The letter again? Poirot's eyes sharpened. A silent character in our drama, I must find it. He rose, glancing toward Inspector Tazzy, who had been observing from the tent's fringe. Let us proceed with interviews. The more noise they make, the clearer the silence becomes. The guests were gathered in a semicircle around Poirot. He moved to the centre, letting the late morning sun filter through the tent's coloured fabric and cast strange shadows on the floor. "I ask for your patience," he began, "for I intend to speak with each of you privately. Not to accuse, but to understand. Someone here knows more than they admit." First came Lady Hemsworth, tall, stern, and swathed in violet silk. Her expression held both irritation and fear. "I demand this necklace theft be investigated seriously." Poirot inclined his head. "But of course, where was it kept?" "In my private tent, in a red lacquered box. It was locked." Poirot scribbled in his notebook. "And when did you last see it?" "Shortly before the music began. I wore it briefly, but decided it clashed with my gown." "And who else knew where it was kept?" "No one." "Forgive me, madame," Poirot said softly, "but that is rarely true." Next came Doctor Rahim, who had nothing to offer but speculation and a vague comment about dark energies. He believed the disappearance was symbolic. Poirot did not argue. Instead, he asked about the positions of each artifact in the tent. Then came Amal Ben Ziad, the Moroccan textile trader, a soft-spoken man with coal-lined eyes and meticulous manners. "I saw Yvette laughing," he said, "but not alone. There was a man near her. I believe it was Julian Parker." Julian Parker, a British art broker with a sunburnt nose and a history of failed ventures, was next. He denied everything. "She wasn't talking to me," he insisted. "I was across the room with the dancers. I couldn't hear anything." Poirot said nothing, only noted the faint ring of sweat on Julian's collar. A detail, but not yet a clue. One by one, Poirot moved through the list. The same names repeated: Yvette, the mirror, the missing letter. But something was forming. Beneath the surface, a pattern not in the words, but in their rhythm. At last, he returned to the divan, deep in thought. Lionel Merton stood nearby, arms folded. "You believe it's someone here?" "Always," Poirot said. "In such cases it is never the distant stranger." "But why her scarf? Why my trunk?" Poirot looked up. "Because it casts you into confusion, and confusion breeds delay. Someone wishes to delay me." Poirot rose again and turned to Tarzy. "We will search Lady Hemsworth's tent next, then Madame Celestine's writing desk, and finally I wish to examine the lanterns above this canopy, particularly the one nearest the mirror's original placement." Tarzy raised an eyebrow. "You think the lanterns were used?" "I think the light lied," Poirot replied. As they moved to Lady Hemsworth's tent, Poirot felt the tension tighten. The scent of secrets thickened. Someone among them had orchestrated Yvette's disappearance with precision and elegance, traits Poirot recognized intimately. But elegance could not mask motive, and the desert, despite its illusions, would yield its truths. Chapter 5. Secrets Beneath the Lanterns. Lady Hemsworth's tent stood like a defiant fortress among the others, deep plum canvas with golden tiebacks and heavy flaps that muffled the world outside. Poirot entered first, followed by Inspector Tarzy and one of the guards. The interior was as precise as its owner, trunks lined perfectly, scarves rolled into colour-coded bundles, and the red lacquered jewellery box sitting atop a mahogany travel desk. Poirot examined it without touching. "Was it forced?" Tarzy inspected the lock. "No marks." "Then someone had the key," Poirot said, "or the box was never locked at all." Lady Hemsworth, observing from the threshold with arms crossed, snapped, "Are you implying I fabricated the theft?" "I imply nothing," Poirot replied gently. "But you would not be the first to invent a crime to hide another." She blanched, said nothing. Poirot turned to the guard. "Photograph the box, catalogue its contents, Even if none are missing, a pattern may yet emerge. They exited in silence. As they stepped into the blinding noon light, Poirot shaded his eyes and turned back toward the main pavilion. "I believe it is time we inspect the lanterns," he said softly. Inside the central tent, workers were already adjusting ladders under Tarzi's orders. A dozen lanterns, ornate brass frames with colored glass panes, hung in careful symmetry above the audience cushions and artifact tables. Poirot gestured to the one closest to where Yvette had stood. "Careful," he warned, as a young assistant unclasped the lantern from its hook and lowered it. The lantern's base was hollow, unusual. Most were sealed by brass plating, but this one bore a screwable panel. Poirot examined it, then twisted gently. The base came free with a click. Inside was a folded scrap of parchment. Poirot opened it slowly, revealing neat handwriting, elegant, deliberate, and unmistakably feminine. "Come alone to the edge of the canyon, where the dunes dip like a cradle. Midnight. Burn this." Poirot did not burn it. Instead, he turned it toward the light, noting the fine blue fibers embedded in the parchment, suggesting French make, not local. The ink shimmered slightly, lapis-based, expensive, likely part of a calligraphy set. Célestine Montfleur owned such a set. Poirot had seen it the day before in her study tent. He tucked the parchment into his pocket. Tarzi frowned. "You think Yvette received this before her disappearance?" "I think she followed its instructions," Poirot replied. "Which means she left willingly, at least at first. But to meet whom? That, my friend, is the game." Poirot returned to the guest list. He drew a circle around 4 names: Lionel Merton, Julian Parker, Amal Ben-Ziad, and Madame Célestine. Each had means, motive, or access. "I will see them again," he murmured, "but separately and differently." As afternoon wore on, Poirot requested an informal tea gathering inside the tent. The excuse was civility. The goal was pressure. They came, Julian first, fidgety and overdressed, then Amal, who sat gracefully, Lionel, now visibly drained, and finally Célestine, who maintained perfect posture. Poirot served the tea himself, observing every reaction, every twitch of the eyes. "Mademoiselle Yvette received a letter before she vanished," he said conversationally. "It instructed her to go somewhere secret, alone." No one spoke. Poirot poured more tea. Curious, no, that she obeyed. She was not a foolish girl. Lionel looked up. She was impulsive. "But cautious," added Célestine. "She would not have gone without trusting the source." Julian coughed. "You think she wrote it herself?" Poirot smiled thinly. "No, monsieur. I think the one who wrote it is here, with us." A long silence followed. Poirot let it linger. Then he stood. "Tea is concluded. I thank you." As they dispersed, Poirot made a final note in his book. It wasn't what they had said. It was how they had said it. Julian had feigned surprise too quickly. Amal had not asked a single question. Célestine had spoken of Yvette in the past tense, and Lionel had flinched, not at the mention of the note, but at the word trust. Poirot returned to his quarters. He placed the parchment beside the red scarf and the key. 3 clues, disparate, but forming the edge of a pattern. And as the sun began its descent behind the dunes, Poirot whispered, "The mirage begins to fade." Chapter 5. Secrets Beneath the Lanterns. Lady Hemsworth's tent stood like a defiant fortress among the others, deep, plum canvas with golden tiebacks and heavy flaps that muffled the world outside. Poirot entered first, followed by Inspector Tarzi and one of the guards. The interior was as precise as its owner. Trunks lined perfectly, scarves rolled into color-coded bundles, and the red lacquered jewellery box sitting atop a mahogany travel desk. Poirot examined it without touching. Was it forced? Tarzy inspected the lock. No marks. "And someone had the key," Poirot said, "or the box was never locked at all." Lady Hemsworth, observing from the threshold with arms crossed, snapped, "Are you implying I fabricated the theft?" "I imply nothing," Poirot replied gently. "But you would not be the first to invent a crime to hide another." She blanched, said nothing. Poirot turned to the guard. "Photograph the box. Catalogue its contents, even if none are missing. A pattern may yet emerge." They exited in silence. As they stepped into the blinding noonlight, Poirot shaded his eyes and turned back toward the main pavilion. "I believe it is time we inspect the lanterns," he said softly. Inside the central tent, workers were already adjusting ladders under Tarzy's orders. A dozen lanterns, ornate brass frames with coloured glass panes, hung in careful symmetry above the audience cushions and artifact tables. Poirot gestured to the one closest to where Yvette had stood. "Careful," he warned, as a young assistant unclasped the lantern from its hook and lowered it. The lantern's base was hollow, unusual. Most were sealed by brass plating, but this one bore a screwable panel. Poirot examined it, then twisted gently. The base came free with a click. Inside was a folded scrap of parchment. Poirot opened it slowly, revealing neat handwriting, elegant, deliberate, and unmistakably feminine. "Come alone to the edge of the canyon, where the dunes dip like a cradle. Midnight. Burn this." Poirot did not burn it. Instead, he turned it toward the light, noting the fine blue fibers embedded in the parchment, suggesting French make, not local. The ink shimmered slightly, lapis-based, expensive, likely part of a calligraphy set. Célestine Montfleur owned such a set. Poirot had seen it the day before in her study tent. He tucked the parchment into his pocket. Tarzy frowned. "You think Yvette received this before her disappearance?" "I think she followed its instruction," Poirot replied. "Which means she left willingly. At least at first." "But to meet whom?" "That, my friend, is the game." Poirot returned to the guest list. He drew a circle around 4 names: Lionel Merton, Julian Parker, Amal Ben Ziad, and Madame Célestine. Each had means, motive, or access. "I will see them again," he murmured, "but separately and differently." As afternoon wore on, Poirot requested an informal tea gathering inside the tent. The excuse was civility. The goal was pressure. They came, Julian first, fidgety and overdressed, then Amal, who sat gracefully, Lionel, now visibly drained, and finally Célestine, who maintained perfect posture. Poirot served the tea himself, observing every reaction, every twitch of the eyes. "Mademoiselle Yvette received a letter before she vanished," he said conversationally. "It instructed her to go somewhere secret, alone." No one spoke. Poirot poured more tea. "Curious, no, that she obeyed. She was not a foolish girl." Lionel looked up. "She was impulsive." "But cautious," added Célestine. "She would not have gone without trusting the source." Julian coughed. "You think she wrote it herself?" Poirot smiled thinly. "No, monsieur. I think the one who wrote it is here, with us." A long silence followed. Poirot let it linger. Then he stood. "Tea is concluded. I thank you." As they dispersed, Poirot made a final note in his book. It wasn't what they had said, it was how they had said it. Julian had feigned surprise too quickly. Amal had not asked a single question. Célestine had spoken of Yvette in the past tense, and Lionel had flinched, not at the mention of the note, but at the word trust. Poirot returned to his quarters. He placed the parchment beside the red scarf and the key. 3 clues, disparate, but forming the edge of a pattern. And as the sun began its descent behind the dunes, Poirot whispered, "The mirage begins to fade." Chapter 6. The False Lead. The desert night arrived swiftly, the temperature plummeting as the horizon blurred into an endless void of stars. The Mirage Caravan was quiet now, save for the soft hum of distant lanterns and the occasional rustle of canvas as the wind picked up. It was a silence that held something ominous in its depths, like the calm before a storm. Poirot sat beneath the flickering light of his desk lamp, going over the notes again, the letter found in the lantern, Yvette's scarf, the mysterious key. Everything pointed to one undeniable fact. Someone here knew exactly what had happened to Yvette and was waiting for Poirot to make the wrong move. The tension in the camp had only grown. Madame Celestine, ever composed, had retreated to her quarters. Lionel Merton had barely spoken in hours. Julian Parker had been visibly agitated, while Amal Ben Ziad had slipped away for a time, only to return looking more inscrutable than ever. Poirot's mind raced through possibilities as he scrutinized his notes. The key, still tucked in his pocket, seemed to whisper secrets he hadn't yet uncovered. And the letter, clearly a call to action, meant to draw Yvette away from the safety of the gala. But who had penned it? It was obvious the letter had been written by someone close to Yvette. The handwriting was elegant, precise, yet not one of the suspects had confessed to such a correspondence. Poirot looked up at the soft murmur of voices outside. The wind had begun to howl, casting long shadows on the walls of his quarters. The guests had been called to the main pavilion for a late dinner, but Poirot wasn't interested in the meals served beneath the canopy. He needed answers, and he needed them now. As if on cue, there was a knock at his door. Poirot opened it to find Inspector Tarzi standing in the frame, his face grave. "Monsieur Poirot," Tarzi said, his voice low. "There's been an incident, a new lead." Poirot's eyes lit up. "A new lead?" "Yes," Tarzi replied. "Amal Ben Ziad has gone missing." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Missing? How?" "We do not know, but there is a trail. He was seen leaving his tent after midnight. Then nothing. No one heard him, but a few of the other guests say they noticed his absence this morning. His belongings are still in his tent." Poirot nodded, already formulating a plan. "I will see his quarters at once. Lead the way, Inspector." Tarzi's pace quickened as Poirot followed him through the darkened grounds. The moon cast a silvery glow on the sand, and in the distance the tents loomed like dark sentinels. The guard at the entrance to Amal's tent stood at attention, but did not speak. Poirot gave him a polite nod before stepping inside. The interior of Amal's tent was as neat as one would expect from a man of such refined tastes. A neatly rolled carpet lay in one corner, while a writing desk sat at the far end, papers neatly stacked and a small silver inkwell beside them. But it was the bed that drew Poirot's attention. The sheets had been disturbed, as if someone had hastily risen in the night. The pillow was still indented, but there was no sign of Amal. Poirot leaned forward and examined the nightstand. There, among the small trinkets and coins, was a small, folded piece of parchment, another letter. This one was hastily scrawled in a rush of ink. Poirot carefully unfolded it. It was addressed to no one in particular, but the words were unmistakable. "Meet me at the edge of the dunes, midnight, alone. It's the only way. Trust no one." Poirot's mind reeled. The same handwriting, the same cryptic instruction. Amal had followed Yvette's footsteps, but why had he disappeared, and why had he been so quick to leave? "Inspector, the letter," Poirot murmured. It is the same as the one found in the lantern. Amal has played his part. Tazi looked confused. You think he's involved? I think he knows more than he's letting on, Poirot replied sharply. But the question remains, what did Amal see that caused him to run? Poirot turned back to the tent's interior. There was something off about the way the room was arranged, an imperfection in the way the furniture had been placed, as though Amal had been in a hurry. Poirot stepped closer to the desk, running his fingers along the edge. There, beneath a stack of paper, was a small object, a gold cufflink. It was not Amal's. Poirot's heart skipped a beat. It was too small, too delicate for the Moroccan trader's taste. It belonged to someone else. Lionel. Poirot turned to Tazi. This changes things. We need to find Amal, and we need to speak to Merton. Why Merton? Tazi asked, still in confusion. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Because this is no longer about Yvette's disappearance alone. This is about a web that has been carefully spun, and it is Merton who holds the centre of it. As Poirot stepped out of the tent, the winds picked up once more, sending the shadows dancing around them. The mystery deepened with every passing moment, and in the distance the howls of the desert seemed to echo with a warning. The net was closing. But would Poirot catch the spider before it slipped away? Chapter 7. The Shadow of Merton. The wind continued its relentless howling as Poirot and Inspector Tazi made their way toward the edge of the camp. The air was thick with the scent of sand and herbs, carrying the faint hum of whispered conversations from the remaining guests. The search for Amal had only just begun, but Poirot's mind was already focused on Lionel Merton. Tazi had returned to the central tent to organize the search party, but Poirot had not yet felt the need to involve the other guests. It was clear now that they were being pulled into a web of misdirection, and the more eyes that were watching, the less likely Poirot would be to find the truth. They reached the tent where Merton had been staying. It was quieter here, the rustle of the wind muted by the canvas walls. Poirot paused outside, his mind racing. The cufflink found in Amal's tent was the final piece of evidence that tied Lionel to the puzzle, and now it was time to confront him. Poirot knocked lightly on the entrance. "Come in," came Lionel's voice from within. Poirot stepped inside, followed by Tazi, who stood by the door, watching. Merton was sitting at his desk, his back to them, scribbling something in a notebook. He didn't look up immediately, as though absorbed in whatever he was writing. "Forgive me for disturbing you, Monsieur Merton," Poirot began, his tone polite but firm. "But I believe we have some matters to discuss." Lionel turned slowly, his face pale, but his composure remained intact. "Of course, Monsieur Poirot. What is it you wish to ask?" Poirot did not immediately answer. He glanced around the small, neatly furnished tent, a desk, a single chair, a bed pushed against the far wall, and a small wardrobe tucked into the corner. There was no sign of distress, no sign that anything had been disturbed. But Poirot knew better than to trust appearances. "I find myself wondering," Poirot said, "why I found this in Amal Ben Ziad's tent." He pulled the gold cufflink from his pocket and held it out between his fingers. Lionel's eyes flickered, but his face remained an unreadable mask. I don't understand." "Don't you?" Poirot pressed. "I found this cufflink under a stack of papers, just beside where Amal had been sleeping. It is a most peculiar thing for someone to leave behind, don't you think?" Tazi, standing by the door, noticed Merton's stiff posture. The detective's scrutiny was piercing, and the longer Lionel hesitated, the more obvious it became that he had something to hide. "Where did you get it?" Poirot asked. "I don't know. Lionel said quickly, standing now. It's not mine, I swear. Poirot raised an eyebrow. Really? Because I distinctly recall seeing you wearing a pair of cufflinks identical to this one at the gala. Lionel took a step back, his breath quickening. That's absurd. Is it? Poirot's gaze never wavered. You see, Monsieur Merton, I am not interested in games. I only seek the truth. Tarzi stepped forward. You know something about Amal, don't you? I don't! Lionel shouted, his voice louder than he had intended. He quickly cleared his throat, trying to regain his composure. I don't know where he went. I didn't have anything to do with his disappearance. Poirot stepped closer, observing the trembling hands that Lionel tried to hide. Then why would you leave your cufflink in his tent, Monsieur Merton? And why, pray tell, would he take it with him? Unless he knew something that had led him to confront you. Lionel's voice faltered, and he looked at Tarzi, then back to Poirot. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I didn't want to hurt anyone. Poirot's expression softened, though his eyes remained sharp. Tell me everything, Monsieur Merton. Who were you protecting, and what part did you play in this? Lionel's shoulders slumped, as if the weight of his confession had finally become too much to bear. He sank back into the chair, running his hands through his hair. It wasn't supposed to go this far, he whispered. It was all supposed to be a warning. A warning? Poirot repeated. A warning for whom? Yvette, Lionel admitted. She was going to ruin everything. Poirot's gaze grew even sharper. Ruin what? Lionel hesitated, then, in a low voice, began to explain. Yvette had found something, a ledger, hidden in the back of my grandfather's trunk, something that could have destroyed my family's reputation. It was about my father's dealings in Egypt, ties with... Smugglers, Poirot interjected. Lionel's eyes widened. Yes, it wasn't supposed to be known, but Yvette found it. She had threatened to go public with it. She said she would reveal everything. And you feared she would? Poirot pressed. Lionel nodded. I didn't mean for her to disappear. I swear I never wanted that. But I panicked. I didn't know what to do. I thought if I could just get her to back off, everything would be fine. But now... I see it's all gone wrong. Poirot turned to Tarzi. It seems we are not dealing with a simple disappearance after all. Monsieur Merton may not be the mastermind, but he is certainly a part of the story. As Lionel sat in stunned silence, Poirot looked back at the young man, his expression unchanged. You will remain under our watch. Monsieur Merton, there is much more to uncover. Poirot stepped toward the exit. I suggest you do not attempt to leave the camp. There are many questions yet unanswered. As Poirot and Tarzi left the tent, the desert wind howled louder than before, as though the sands themselves were trying to whisper the secrets that lay buried beneath the surface. Chapter 8. The Key to the Past. The night air had grown colder, and the shadows seemed to stretch longer across the desert as Poirot and Inspector Tarzi made their way back to the main pavilion. Lionel Merton's confession had stirred more questions than answers, and Poirot's mind raced with the implications. Yvette had known too much, and Lionel had been desperate to keep her quiet. But now, it seemed, the situation had spiraled far beyond his control. Poirot's steps were steady, but his mind was not at ease. The threads of the mystery were beginning to tie together, yet the knots remained tight, each turn of the puzzle revealing more hidden layers. The key, the cufflink, the letters, they were all pieces, but where did they lead? And why had Yvette been so sure that revealing the truth would destroy everything? They entered the pavilion, where the air was thick with murmurs and the scent of spiced food. Most of the guests had already retired for the evening, though a few lingered near the perimeter, talking in hushed tones. Poirot noticed that many eyes turned to him as he passed, some with curiosity, others with something darker. The tension was palpable. Whatever he had uncovered, it was clear that the very air in the camp had changed. Trust had evaporated, and the search for Yvette had become a race against time. Poirot stopped near the fire pit, where a single lantern cast flickering light against the canvas. Tarzy, who had been quiet since their conversation with Lionel, finally spoke. "Monsieur Poirot, what do you think of Merton's story? Do you believe he was simply protecting his family's secrets?" Poirot's lips tightened as he considered the question. "There is truth in his words, yes. But I do not believe that is all. Merton's confession is the truth of a man backed into a corner, one who has been playing a dangerous game. But there is more to this story, more than he has yet revealed." Tarzy looked at him curiously. "You think he's hiding something else?" Poirot nodded slowly. "Indeed, but I do not think Lionel Merton is the key to this mystery, despite his involvement. There is another force at work here, someone who is pulling the strings from behind the scenes, and that, mon ami, is where I will turn my focus next." Poirot's gaze drifted over the camp. His eyes landed on Madame Celestine, who stood near the edge of the pavilion, watching the proceedings with an air of quiet composure. There was a certainty in her stance, a calm that seemed almost practiced. But it was the kind of calm that hid something much darker. The pieces of the puzzle were slowly falling into place, and Poirot could feel the pull of one final, unanswered question. What role had Celestine Montfleur played in all of this? He turned back to Tarzy. "I will need to speak with Madame Celestine." Tarzy looked hesitant. "Are you sure?" "She's been under so much stress. And after the confrontation with her daughter—" Poirot raised a hand. "Stress is a poor excuse for deception, Inspector. If anything, it has sharpened her focus." They approached Celestine, who had turned toward the distant horizon, as though searching for something in the vast, dark expanse. Poirot stepped forward, his movements deliberate. When she turned to face him, her expression remained impassive, but there was something in her eyes that shifted, something that betrayed her calm exterior. "Monsieur Poirot," she said softly, her voice tinged with a weariness that seemed both genuine and calculated. "What is it you seek now? I have already told you all I know." "Ah, but Madame," Poirot said with a knowing smile, "I do not think you have told me everything. I believe there is more beneath the surface than you are willing to admit." Celestine's lips tightened, and for a moment she said nothing. Then, with a faint sigh, she gestured toward a small tent near the back of the pavilion. "Come inside, then. Let us speak where we will not be overheard." Poirot followed her inside, where the air was thick with the scent of incense. The tent was sparse, furnished only with a few chairs, and a low table where a collection of papers lay scattered. A fire crackled in a small brazier, casting a soft glow on Celestine's face. "Please," Celestine said, her voice steady, though there was a faint tremor in her hands as she poured tea. "Ask your questions, Poirot. You have caught us all in your web of suspicion. You have spoken to my husband, to my daughter's fiancé, to all of my guests. What more do you want?" Poirot's eyes locked onto hers, his gaze unwavering. "I want the truth, madame. You said that Yvette found something that would ruin your family, but you never explained what it was. Was it simply the ledger? Or was there more? What did Yvette truly know?" Celestine's expression flickered for a brief moment, but she quickly regained control. It was a collection of records, things from my husband's dealings with a few unsavory individuals, but it was not meant for Yvette to uncover. She was too young to understand, and when she did, she became a threat. Poirot leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. "A threat to what, madame?" "A threat to everything I've worked for," she said quietly. "To the legacy of this family, to the future." Poirot studied her for a long moment, the silence stretching between them. Then he spoke again, his voice low. "And when she threatened to expose this, what did you do?" "I—" Celestine's eyes darted to the door, as though seeking escape. But there was no turning back now. "I tried to reason with her, but Yvette was determined. She was going to ruin everything." Poirot stood, his mind already turning over the new pieces of information. "Then it is clear, madame. You had more to lose than you let on, and I believe you know exactly where Yvette is." Celestine's lips quivered, but she said nothing. Poirot turned to leave, but before he could reach the door, Celestine spoke one last time, her voice barely above a whisper. "If you want the truth, Poirot, you must look beyond what is visible. Sometimes the answers are not where you think." Poirot paused, his back to her. "I will, madame. I always do." Chapter 9. The Hidden Truth. Poirot stepped out of Madame Celestine's tent, his mind already turning the new pieces of the puzzle over. The words she had spoken, soft yet edged with a strange finality, had made one thing clear. The stakes were higher than he had anticipated. There was more to this story than a daughter threatening to expose her family's secrets. There was a deeper web at work, one tangled in motivations, betrayal, and fear. His eyes turned toward the distant horizon, where the sands met the sky in a seamless stretch. The winds had picked up again, swirling around the camp with an unsettling restlessness, as if nature itself was warning him that time was running out. Yvette's disappearance had been calculated, precise, and the longer Poirot lingered in the camp, the more he felt the pressure to unearth the truth before someone else silenced it forever. As he made his way back toward the central pavilion, his mind returned to Celestine's final words. "Look beyond what is visible. Sometimes the answers are not where you think." He knew exactly what that meant. Celestine had not just been hinting at the family's secrets. She had been speaking to him as though she knew there was something hidden in plain sight, something Poirot had yet to see. Tazi was waiting for him by the entrance to the pavilion, his expression concerned. "Monsieur Poirot, I've been looking for you. There's something strange." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "What is it, Inspector?" Tazi stepped closer, lowering his voice. "It's about the letter, the one we found in Amal's tent." Poirot's interest piqued. "What of it?" "There's something odd about the ink. It doesn't quite match the rest of the writing we've found. I had one of the guards check the paper. It's not local. The letter is from an imported set." Poirot frowned. "Imported? Do you know where it came from?" Tazi shook his head. "Not yet. But it's not the only thing. I also found something else. Something I didn't expect. There's a ledger hidden in the back of the pavilion, beneath some crates of supplies. We think it might belong to Madame Celestine." Poirot's heart quickened. "A ledger? What kind of ledger?" "We're not sure, but it's old, very old, and it looks like it's been hidden for some time." Poirot's mind immediately clicked into action. If Madame Celestine had been hiding something, it could be connected to Yvette's discovery of the family's secrets. Perhaps this ledger was the key to understanding everything that had happened. "I need to see it," Poirot said, his voice firm. Immediately. Tazi nodded, leading the way through the darkened camp toward the back of the pavilion. The night had grown colder still, and the shadows stretched long over the sand as Poirot followed Tazi through the maze of tents. When they arrived at the spot near the crates, Poirot crouched down and examined the hidden ledger. It was a large, leather-bound book, the edges worn and yellowed with age. The lock on the front had been carefully pried open. Poirot's fingers traced the cover, then flipped it open with methodical precision. The pages were filled with meticulous handwriting, numbers, names, and dates, all written in a careful, deliberate hand. As Poirot skimmed the pages, the pattern became clear. There were payments, receipts, and transactions listed in great detail, but they weren't related to the normal business of the Montfleur estate. The names listed weren't just suppliers and clients, they were individuals tied to shadowy organizations. Poirot's pulse quickened. This was it, the proof of what Yvette had discovered. The family's connections to smuggling, to illegal dealings, to corruption at the highest levels. The very thing that Celestine had tried to hide. Yvette had uncovered it, and that had made her a target. Poirot closed the ledger, his mind racing with the implications. He had found what he needed, but there was still a crucial question left unanswered. Where was Yvette now? And who else, besides Celestine, had something to lose? Turning to Tazi, Poirot spoke in a low, urgent tone. We need to find Madame Celestine. Now she knows more than she's told us. Tazi's eyes widened in understanding. You think she's involved? I don't think she's just involved, Poirot replied, his voice steady but cold. I think she's the key to everything. If we can get her to confess, if we can make her see that she can't hide anymore, then we'll have the truth. The two men moved swiftly through the camp, their footsteps muffled by the sand. Poirot's mind was already working through the possibilities. If Celestine had hidden the ledger, there was a chance she had also hidden something else, something that could tie everything together. And Yvette was the missing link, the one who knew too much. They reached Celestine's quarters just as the wind began to pick up again, sending a shiver through the air. Poirot knocked firmly on the door. There was no answer. He knocked again, more urgently this time. Tazi, Poirot said, his voice tight, we must enter. Tazi hesitated, then nodded. Together they forced the door open, their eyes scanning the dimly lit room. Celestine was nowhere to be found, but there, on the desk, was a final note, one that had been left in haste, as though the writer had been interrupted. Meet me by the old well at dawn. We must end this before it's too late. Poirot's heart raced. This was it. The final confrontation was imminent. But who was Celestine meeting, and why was she running? The pieces were falling into place, but Poirot knew that with each step, the danger grew. Chapter 10. The Well at Dawn. The first light of dawn crept over the horizon, casting long, slanted shadows across the camp. The night had passed quietly, but in Poirot's mind, the pieces of the mystery had only grown more tangled. The note had been clear. Meet me by the old well at dawn. But whose handwriting was it? And who was Celestine meeting there? Poirot stood outside the pavilion, his coat tightly buttoned against the chill, watching the pale sky slowly brighten. Tazi had been instructed to round up a small group of guards, and the search was underway. But Poirot felt that the answer lay not in the search, but in the confrontation that awaited them by the well. There, hidden in the shadows of the past, was the final clue. The desert stretched before him, still and silent. The only sound was the soft scuff of sand beneath his boots. Tazi approached, walking with purpose. The guards had already fanned out, covering the area near the well, and Poirot's instincts told him they would find nothing there. The well, an ancient structure with crumbling stones and a dry basin, was a place of secrets. It had stood there long before the Montfleur estate had been built, a relic of time forgotten by most, but remembered by those who had something to hide. "We are ready, Monsieur Poirot," Tarzy said, his voice low. "But I must ask, do you really think Madame Celestine will be there?" The note seemed like an invitation for her to meet with someone, possibly someone close to her. Poirot didn't answer immediately. Instead, he paused, looking over the barren land surrounding them. The well was a few hundred meters away, isolated from the rest of the camp, an ideal spot for secrets to be exchanged in the quiet of the night. "It is not just Madame Celestine who is tied to this," Poirot finally said, his voice measured. "It is her entire life, her family. She is trying to protect something far larger than herself." Tarzy raised an eyebrow, his expression one of suspicion. "But you think she's meeting someone here?" Poirot nodded slowly, his eyes narrowing. "Yes, and I believe she is not alone. Someone has been orchestrating this entire charade from the beginning. They have been careful, methodical, and they have been waiting for the right moment to strike." The two men approached the well cautiously, each step deliberate, their breath visible in the crisp morning air. As they neared the well, Poirot slowed his pace, his senses heightened. There was something wrong with the silence. It wasn't the usual peaceful quiet of the desert. It was too still, too tense. Something was about to happen. Then, as they reached the edge of the well, Poirot saw a figure standing in the shadows, cloaked in the long drape of a dark robe. A woman, but it was not Madame Celestine. Poirot stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "You are late." The figure turned slowly, revealing the face of a woman who was not unfamiliar. It was Lady Hemsworth. Tarzy froze, his hand instinctively going to the sidearm at his belt. "Lady Hemsworth?" he muttered, surprised. "What are you doing here?" Lady Hemsworth's lips curled into a tight smile. "I thought I might be of some help," she said coolly. "After all, Poirot, you seem to have forgotten the obvious." Poirot's brow furrowed as he took a step closer. "The obvious?" Lady Hemsworth nodded. "You've been looking at all the wrong suspects. This has nothing to do with family secrets or Yvette's supposed discoveries. This is about something far more personal." Poirot's gaze flickered to Tarzy, who looked equally puzzled. "And what exactly is that?" "Revenge," she replied, her voice soft but laced with venom. "I thought you would have figured it out by now. After all, you're supposed to be a great detective." Poirot's eyes narrowed, his mind working quickly. Revenge? Who was she seeking revenge on, and why had she come here, alone, in the dead of night? "You don't understand, do you?" Lady Hemsworth continued, her eyes cold with bitterness. "This entire charade, the missing woman, the hidden letters, the smuggling, was never about money or power. It was about a score to settle." "A score to settle?" Poirot repeated. "You are not speaking plainly, madame." Lady Hemsworth stepped closer, her expression hardening. "I should have killed him years ago," she muttered, almost to herself. "But I couldn't. I couldn't let it end like that." Poirot's heart skipped. "You speak of someone specific." Lady Hemsworth's lips twisted into a mocking smile. "Of course. Augustin Montfleur, your dear friend." Poirot's pulse quickened. The pieces were falling into place, but there was still so much to uncover. "You've been part of this from the start?" Poirot asked slowly, his mind racing. "You and Celestine were involved in this plan?" Lady Hemsworth shook her head. "Number Celestine was always in the dark. She didn't know what I had planned." Poirot's mind churned. "What is it you want from all of this, madame?" She stepped back, her eyes flashing with cold fury. "Revenge! Augustin Montfleur ruined everything for me. He took something I loved, something I will never get back. This whole event, the gala, the disappearance, it was all set up to expose him for what he is." Poirot's lips pressed together in understanding. "You are the one who sent the letter to Yvette, aren't you? The one that led her to the well?" Lady Hemsworth nodded grimly. "Yes. I needed to make sure that Yvette knew the truth. She couldn't expose the Montfleur family secrets if she didn't know what he had done." Poirot's heart sank. The web had been even more complicated than he imagined, and the trail was not yet finished. "You see, Poirot," Lady Hemsworth said with a bitter smile, "Augustin Montfleur will be exposed for the monster he is, and you will help me do it." Poirot's mind raced. He knew there was still more to this story, something darker, something yet to be revealed. But now, with the game set and the stakes higher than ever, it was only a matter of time before the final truth came crashing down. Chapter 11. The Final Move. Poirot's mind raced as he listened to Lady Hemsworth's confession, but he maintained a calm, collected exterior. This new revelation was both shocking and deeply troubling. Revenge was indeed a powerful motivator, and it seemed that Lady Hemsworth had been hiding in plain sight, orchestrating a series of carefully laid plans to ruin the Montfleur family. But the question still lingered in Poirot's mind. How much of this was truly about revenge, and how much was about something more sinister? "You believe that exposing Augustin Montfleur will solve everything?" Poirot asked, his voice steady. Lady Hemsworth's eyes narrowed as she fixed him with a cold gaze. "I don't expect you to understand, Poirot. You've been chasing shadows, looking for clues that lead nowhere. The truth is far simpler than you think." Poirot's brow furrowed as he continued to process the puzzle before him. "I think, madame, that you underestimate the complexity of this situation. You believe that revealing Montfleur's past will bring justice, but in doing so, you may also reveal your own hand in this game." Lady Hemsworth's lips curled into a tight smile. "Justice? There's no such thing when people like Montfleur hold all the power. He's been playing the system for years, and I won't let him escape unscathed. Not this time." Poirot took a step closer, studying her face with his keen eyes. "But why involve Yvette? Why not simply expose the truth yourself?" "I never meant for her to be caught in this," Lady Hemsworth said, her voice tinged with frustration. "But she was too curious, too determined to uncover the truth. She became a threat. I couldn't afford to let her ruin everything I've worked for." Poirot nodded slowly, processing her words. He could see the vulnerability in her eyes now, the desperation that came with a plan that had spiraled out of control. But there was still something more, something that didn't sit right with him. "And the letter, madame?" Poirot pressed. "The letter that led Yvette to the well, that wasn't a coincidence, was it?" Lady Hemsworth shifted uncomfortably. "No, it wasn't, but it was never meant to lead her to harm. I only wanted her to understand the truth, to see that Montfleur was not the man he pretended to be." Poirot's gaze softened, but his mind remained sharp. "You've made a grave mistake, madame. By manipulating Yvette, you've set off a chain of events that you cannot control, and now you've put us all at risk." Lady Hemsworth looked away, her gaze flickering with something close to guilt. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I never wanted it to go this far." Poirot's tone was firm, but not unkind. "And yet here we are. The question now is not what you want, but what you are willing to do to make amends." For a moment, Lady Hemsworth remained silent, her eyes, fixed on the ground. Poirot could see that she was grappling with the consequences of her actions, but there was no easy way out of this. The damage had already been done, and the truth was about to come crashing down. "I know what I have to do," she said finally, her voice low. "But it's too late. The web is already spun and there's no escaping it now." Poirot's expression hardened. "There is always a way out, madame. But it requires honesty. It requires you to face the truth, not just about Montfleur, but about yourself." Lady Hemsworth's eyes met his, a flicker of something, fear perhaps, crossing her features. "And what truth is that?" "That you have been deceiving yourself," Poirot replied, his voice unwavering. "This isn't just about revenge, it's about your own guilt, your own role in all of this. You've become as much a part of the lie as Montfleur himself." For the first time, Lady Hemsworth seemed to falter. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed them on the stone edge of the well, her gaze distant. "I never wanted to hurt anyone. I just wanted justice. I thought that if I could expose him, if I could make everyone see what he really is, I would be free." Poirot's expression softened, but his resolve remained firm. "And now, madame, you must choose whether you want to continue down this path of lies and deception or take the step toward redemption. It is not too late to make things right, but it will require you to let go of your desire for vengeance." Lady Hemsworth stood still for a long moment, her face a study of conflicting emotions. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I never meant for any of this to happen." Poirot nodded slowly, his voice calm but resolute. "I know, madame. But the past cannot be undone. All we can do now is ensure that the truth is brought to light and that justice, in whatever form it takes, is served." As they stood in the early light of dawn, Poirot felt a sense of finality settle over him. The pieces were falling into place, and though the mystery was far from over, the truth was beginning to emerge. Lady Hemsworth had played her part, but now it was time for others to face their own roles in this twisted tale. The time for secrets and lies was running out. The final confrontation was near. Poirot turned toward Tarzy, who had been standing silently behind them. "Inspector, it is time we gathered the others. The truth will come to light today." Tarzy nodded, and together they began the walk back toward the camp. The game was nearing its end, but Poirot knew that the final moments would be the most crucial of all. The well had yielded its secrets, but now the real truth awaited. Chapter 12. The Gathering Storm. The camp had begun to stir as the first light of day bathed the tents in a soft glow. The sounds of rustling fabric and low conversations filled the air, but there was a palpable tension among the guests and staff. The whispers were everywhere, rumours about Yvette, about the Montfleur family, and about the detective who seemed to be unravelling it all. No one had been able to escape the gravity of the situation, and the truth, though still elusive, was looming ever closer. Poirot and Tarzy moved swiftly through the camp, their footsteps steady and deliberate. The pieces were falling into place, but Poirot knew that with each passing hour the danger grew. He had spoken with Lady Hemsworth, but there was more to uncover, and he could not afford to waste any more time. They reached the central pavilion, where a small group of guests had gathered, their faces drawn with concern. The atmosphere had shifted. The joviality that had once marked the event was now replaced with suspicion and unease. Poirot could sense that the time for subtlety had passed. It was time to confront the remaining players and draw the final curtain on this mystery. "Inspector," Poirot said quietly, "gather the others." "It is time." Tarzy nodded and went to work, moving quickly to inform the remaining guests that Poirot wished to speak with them. Within moments, a small crowd had gathered, all of them curious, anxious, and more than a little uneasy. Poirot stood in the centre of the room, his sharp gaze scanning each face. He could feel the weight of their eyes on him, the pressure of their expectations. They all wanted answers, but none more so than the man who had been pulling the strings from the very beginning. Augustin Montfleur stood at the edge of the group, his posture stiff and watchful. He had been quiet since Poirot's arrival, and his silence was now more oppressive than ever. He met Poirot's gaze with a look that was hard to decipher, part defiance, part apprehension. "Madame Celestine, Monsieur Merton, and Lady Hemsworth are all present," Poirot began, his voice calm but commanding. "But there are others who have been involved in this matter, some who have not yet spoken the truth." The air seemed to grow heavier as Poirot continued, his eyes never leaving Augustin Montfleur. "The time has come for all of you to share what you know. You cannot hide any longer." Celestine, who had been standing beside her husband, stiffened at the mention of her name. Her gaze flickered nervously between Poirot and Augustin, as if seeking reassurance. But Augustin remained silent, his expression unreadable. Poirot turned to the group, his tone unwavering. "Yvette's disappearance is no accident. It is the culmination of a series of events that were set into motion long before this night. Each of you has played a part, whether you are aware of it or not." He let the words hang in the air for a moment before continuing. "Lady Hemsworth has already confessed her role in this plot. She sought revenge against the Montfleur family for the wrongs done to her. But her motivations were not solely driven by vengeance. She, too, had something to protect." Lady Hemsworth's lips parted as though to speak, but Poirot raised a hand to silence her. "Your confession, madame, is noted, but it is not enough to explain the full extent of what has happened here. There is more." He turned to Augustin. "Monsieur Montfleur, you have been silent throughout this ordeal, and yet you are at the center of everything. It is time to speak." Augustine's eyes flickered with something, guilt, perhaps, or the realization that his carefully constructed facade was beginning to crumble. He cleared his throat and spoke at last, his voice low and strained. "You don't understand," he said, his voice tinged with frustration. "I never wanted any of this. I never intended for it to go this far." Poirot took a step closer, his gaze never wavering. "Then why did you let it? Why did you allow the lies to continue? Why did you let Yvette uncover the truth? You knew the consequences, yet you did nothing." Augustin's shoulders slumped, and for the first time he seemed to shrink under the weight of Poirot's scrutiny. "I didn't think she would go so far," he muttered. "I thought I could control it, keep it quiet. But Yvette, she wasn't like the others. She was too clever, too curious." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And what was it, Monsieur Montfleur, that Yvette discovered?" Augustin hesitated, his face contorting with the inner conflict of someone trying to suppress the truth. "She found out about the ledger, the payments, the people we had dealings with, people we shouldn't have." Poirot's mind clicked into place. "Smugglers, criminals, the same people who had been funding your operations for years." Augustine's face paled. "Yes, I thought I could distance myself from them, but the connections were too deep. Yvette found the ledger, and she threatened to go public with it. I couldn't let that happen." Poirot's gaze softened for a moment, but his voice remained firm. "So you were willing to let her disappear, just to protect yourself?" "I never meant for it to happen like that," Augustin said, his voice breaking. "I didn't want her to be hurt, but I couldn't lose everything. I couldn't let the past destroy us." Poirot turned to the rest of the group. "And yet, in your efforts to protect your family, you have created a situation that will destroy everything you've worked for." He turned back to Augustin. "You are not the only one with a past to hide, Monsieur Montfleur. But now the truth will be known. You cannot outrun it." As Poirot spoke, a shadow passed over the group. In that moment, the weight of their secrets seemed unbearable, and the truth, though painful, was no longer avoidable. The game was nearing its end, and the final act was about to begin. Chapter 13. The Breaking Point. The tension in the pavilion was almost tangible, the air thick with unspoken truths and rising suspicions. Poirot stood at the centre of the room, his eyes sweeping across the faces of the remaining guests, Augustin, Celestine, Lady Hemsworth, and Merton. Each was caught in the web of deception, their fates now intertwined by the events that had unfolded in the desert. For a moment there was silence. Poirot had laid bare the connections, the lies, the family secrets, but there was still one last question that needed answering. Where was Yvette? Was she alive? And if so, who was responsible for her disappearance? Poirot's gaze lingered on Augustin Montfleur, whose face had grown ashen with the weight of his confession. The man was broken, his hands trembling, as he clasped them together in a futile attempt to control his nerves. "Monsieur Montfleur," Poirot said, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade, "you have told us much, but not everything. You claim you didn't intend for Yvette to be harmed, but your actions speak otherwise. You knew she had found the ledger, and yet you did nothing to stop her. Why?" Augustine swallowed hard, his throat dry. I thought if I could get her away, distract her long enough, I could convince her to forget what she'd uncovered. But it was too late. Once she had that ledger, once she knew the truth, there was no stopping her. She wasn't like the others. Poirot nodded slowly, his mind racing as he processed the implications of Augustine's words. "So, you did nothing because you feared what she might do with that knowledge? You thought you could control her, but she was already beyond your reach." Augustine lowered his head in shame, unable to meet Poirot's eyes. "I never meant for it to go this far, but the damage was done. Yvette was determined, and I didn't know how to make her stop." Poirot turned to Lady Hemsworth, whose eyes were cast downward, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. "And you, madame? You had a hand in all of this as well. You used Yvette's curiosity to your advantage, knowing she would dig into the past. But what was your true goal, madame?" Lady Hemsworth's face remained impassive, her eyes hard, as she met Poirot's gaze. "I did what I had to do. I was protecting myself, just like him." She gestured toward Augustin. "You think I wanted this? You think I wanted to be tangled in this web of lies? But I had no choice. I was a victim in all of this, too." Poirot's lips tightened as he considered her words. "You speak of yourself as a victim, madame, but you are not innocent. You knew the risks of your actions, and you played your part in Yvette's fate." The silence in the room deepened, as if the weight of Poirot's words had crushed the very air around them. Everyone had been complicit, yet no one had been willing to confront the truth, until now. Poirot turned to Merton, who had been silent throughout the exchange. The young man was pale, his brow furrowed with an expression of confusion and guilt. He seemed to shrink beneath the weight of Poirot's gaze. "Monsieur Merton," Poirot said, his voice gentle but firm, "you have remained quiet, But you are not without involvement in all of this. You too have a part to play in Yvette's disappearance. What do you know? Merton's eyes widened, and he looked to Augustine and Celestine as though seeking support. But the silence in the room spoke volumes, and Merton knew he could no longer hide from the truth. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yvette! She was everything to me, but I didn't know what to do when she found the ledger. I didn't want her to ruin her future, to expose everything. I thought if I could just make her see the reason." Poirot's expression softened. "You thought you could control her too, Monsieur Merton. You thought you could protect her from the truth. But in doing so, you became complicit in the web of lies." Merton's face contorted with frustration and guilt. "I didn't want her to suffer. I didn't want to lose her." Poirot studied Merton for a long moment, then shook his head. "It is not about losing someone, Monsieur Merton. It is about protecting them from the dangers that lie ahead. Yvette's fate was sealed the moment you chose to keep secrets instead of telling her the truth." The room fell into another heavy silence, and Poirot's mind raced. The pieces were nearly in place. He could feel it. The truth was within his grasp, but there was still one final piece left to uncover. Where was Yvette? Poirot turned back to Augustin, who had been watching him carefully, his face lined with guilt and fear. "Monsieur Montfleur, there is something you have not told us. You said you didn't intend for Yvette to be harmed. But if that were true, why did you not search for her immediately after she disappeared?" Augustine's face twisted with guilt. "I didn't know where to look. I thought she had run away. I thought she was hiding, trying to escape the pressure. But then the note came. The one that told me she was safe, that she had left. It was too late." Poirot's heart sank. "You believed that note? You trusted it?" Augustin nodded, his voice breaking. "It was all I had. I couldn't let the truth come out." Poirot's mind raced as the final realization hit him like a thunderclap. "The note. It wasn't just to you, Monsieur Montfleur. It was to all of you. Yvette's disappearance was not a random event. It was planned." Lady Hemsworth's face hardened, her lips curling into a tight smile. "You're too late, Poirot. Everything has already been set into motion. It's over." Poirot's gaze was sharp. "It is never over, madame. Not until the truth is known." The storm was closing in. The pieces were finally falling into place, and Poirot knew that the final confrontation was imminent. Chapter 14. The Final Move. The tension in the pavilion thickened. Poirot had gathered all the players in this twisted game: Augustin, Celestine, Lady Hemsworth, and Lionel. He could feel the weight of their secrets pressing down on him. The truth, however elusive, was now within his reach. "You are all complicit," Poirot began, his voice steady. "Whether knowingly or not, you've all played your part in this drama, but the real question is, where is Yvette?" The silence in the room grew heavy, everyone's eyes shifting nervously. Celestine looked away, biting her lip, while Lady Hemsworth folded her arms with a grim expression. Lionel shifted uneasily, his posture rigid. Poirot turned to Augustin, his gaze sharp. "Monsieur Montfleur, you have stayed silent for too long. Your daughter's fate is directly tied to the lies you've been hiding." Augustine's face paled. He ran a hand through his hair, struggling to speak. "I never meant for this to happen. Yvette found the ledger. She threatened to expose everything." Poirot pressed on. "But you did nothing. You let her run with the truth. Why?" Augustine's voice trembled. "I thought I could stop her. I thought if I kept her away from it all, we could protect the family's name." But I failed. Poirot's eyes darkened. And now your family is caught in a trap of your own making. The silence was suffocating as Augustin hung his head, the weight of his actions settling in. Poirot looked at Lady Hemsworth, her cold expression betraying nothing. You were involved in this from the beginning, madame. You sought revenge, but now you have all but sealed your own fate. Lady Hemsworth remained silent, unwilling to speak. Poirot's gaze then shifted to Lionel. He had been the quiet observer, but now his time had come. Monsieur Merton, Poirot said, his voice sharp, what do you know of Yvette's disappearance? Lionel's eyes widened in guilt, but he stayed silent. The web was nearly unravelled. All that remained now was the truth. Chapter 15. The Web Unravels. Poirot stood at the centre of the room, his mind racing as he processed the confessions and half-truths that had been laid before him. The pieces were all there, scattered like pieces of a broken puzzle. And yet the most critical question remained unanswered. Where was Yvette? He looked at the group before him, each one of them hiding something. Augustine, Celestine, Lady Hemsworth, and Lionel, they were all entangled in the same web of deceit, and Poirot knew that only one of them could hold the key to Yvette's disappearance. You are all hiding something, Poirot said, his voice calm but commanding. And the truth is always revealed, no matter how carefully it is concealed. Augustin, visibly shaken, avoided Poirot's gaze. I never meant for her to be harmed. I just wanted to protect her. Celestine's eyes flashed with guilt. Yvette was a threat. She had to be stopped. Lady Hemsworth's lips twitched, but she remained silent. It was never meant to go this far, she muttered, almost to herself. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Who took Yvette? Who orchestrated this disappearance? The room was still, save for the faint sound of wind outside. The answer, Poirot knew, was closer than any of them realized, and soon the truth would break free. I know you all have something to hide, Poirot continued, his voice cutting through the tension. But it's time for all the secrets to come to light. Suddenly the door opened, and a guard stepped inside, his face pale. Monsieur Poirot, he said, breathless, Yvette has been found. Poirot's heart raced. This was the moment. The web was about to collapse. Chapter 16. The Revelation. Poirot rushed toward the guard, his pulse quickening. Yvette had been found. It was the breakthrough he had been waiting for, the key to unraveling the entire mystery. He turned to Tarzi, who had just entered the room. Prepare the others, Poirot said, his voice urgent. It's time to confront the truth. The group followed the guard through the camp, the air thick with anticipation. They arrived at the edge of the pavilion, where a small gathering of guards stood by. In the centre of the crowd was Yvette, alive but shaken. Poirot approached her slowly, his gaze softening as he looked at her pale face. She met his eyes, her expression a mixture of relief and fear. Mademoiselle Yvette, Poirot said gently, you are safe now, but we must understand what happened. Who took you? Yvette swallowed hard, her hands trembling. I don't remember much. They blindfolded me. But I know who it was. Poirot's heart skipped a beat. Who? It was Augustin, she whispered, her voice barely audible. He sent someone to take me. He didn't want me to expose the truth. The revelation hit like a thunderclap. Augustin Montfleur had orchestrated it all. The plan had been to silence Yvette, to keep her from revealing the family's secrets. And now it was clear that his role in the conspiracy ran deeper than anyone had realized. Poirot turned to Augustin, his expression darkening. You lied. You told us everything except the truth. Augustine's face drained of colour as the gravity of Yvette's words sank in. No, I never meant for it to go this far, he stammered. Poirot's gaze was unwavering. But it did, and now the consequences must be faced. Yvette looked up at Poirot, her eyes filled with gratitude. Thank you, she whispered. Poirot gave her a small, reassuring smile. The truth has a way of revealing itself, mademoiselle, even in the darkest of times. The puzzle was complete, and the final chapter of this twisted tale was about to unfold. Chapter 17. The Unravelling. With Yvette's confession, the mystery that had plagued the camp for days was now unravelled. Poirot stood in the centre of the pavilion, his mind still processing the final pieces of the puzzle. Augustin Montfleur had orchestrated everything: Yvette's disappearance, the false trails, and the manipulation that had kept the truth hidden. Now, with the truth exposed, Poirot knew it was time for the final reckoning. Augustine's face had gone ashen, his entire demeanour crumpled under the weight of his guilt. He had been so focused on protecting his family's legacy, on concealing their past, that he had lost sight of the one thing that mattered most: truth. "Why did you think you could get away with this, Monsieur Montfleur?" Poirot asked, his voice steady but carrying an edge. "Did you truly believe that your lies could remain hidden forever?" Augustine's eyes were vacant, his shoulders slumped as he struggled to speak. I thought I could protect them. I thought I could keep Yvette safe." "By silencing her?" Poirot's voice was sharp. "By keeping the truth from her? You've done more damage to your family than you realize." The tension in the room was palpable, but Poirot remained resolute. "And now it is time for justice to be served." Lady Hemsworth, who had remained eerily silent until now, spoke up. "You don't understand, Poirot. I did what I had to do." Poirot's eyes locked on hers. "You did what you thought was right. But now, madame, you must face the consequences of your actions." There was no turning back now. The lies had been exposed, the truth revealed, and the consequences of their choices would be felt by all involved. Chapter 18. The Truth Revealed. The final moment of reckoning had arrived. The pavilion was filled with the hum of tension, and the guests stood in uneasy silence as Poirot prepared to make the last revelation. He had pieced together the entire mystery, but the consequences of the truth would fall on all those gathered in the room. Yvette stood beside him, her face pale but resolute. She had been the catalyst for the unravelling of the web, and now she was free from the shadows that had haunted her. Poirot turned to face the group, his eyes sweeping over each person, gauging their reactions. "Everything you have done, every action, every lie, it all led us here," Poirot began. "And now we must face the consequences. There can be no more hiding from the truth." Augustin Montfleur's eyes were filled with regret, but the guilt was no longer enough to conceal the weight of his actions. He had tried to protect his family, but in doing so, he had torn it apart. Poirot's gaze turned to Celestine, who stood with her arms crossed, her face hard as stone. "You knew," Poirot said. "You knew everything, Madame Montfleur. You allowed it to continue even after Yvette uncovered the truth." Celestine's lips pressed into a tight line. "I had no choice," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't understand. I had to protect us." "But at what cost?" Poirot asked. "What have you sacrificed to protect the family name?" Celestine remained silent, her eyes fixed on the floor. Poirot turned to Lionel. "And you, Monsieur Merton, what of your role in all of this?" Lionel shifted uncomfortably, his face a mask of shame. "I never wanted to be part of any of this. I just wanted to be with Yvette." Poirot nodded. "And now you must live with the consequences of your choices, just as they all must." With the final pieces in place, Poirot knew the truth had been exposed, but the damage had been done, and the cost of those secrets would echo for years to come.